haunted Siri Fort, Ashwin, an employee of the Archaeological Survey of India, was working with his team at the site of Siri Fort in Delhi, I. The area of the fort was very large and ate. At night, thieves and drug addicts would occasionally come there, so his team usually worked during the day. What? But today was different for Avnish because he was going to spend the entire night alone there. 600 years ago, Alauddin Khilji built Siri Fort to protect against the attacks of the Mongols. It is said that in response to the brutal Mongol attacks, Khilji, in a fit of rage, beheaded 8,000 Mongol soldiers and embedded their heads into the walls of Siri Fort. After that, a whole city was established within these walls, named Siri due to the buried heads. People believe that the souls of those beheaded soldiers still wander there. The guards told Avnish that at night, strange sounds resembling the cries of headless Mongols asking for help can be heard, and those who have stayed there at night have had attempts made on their lives by having their faces rubbed against the walls. Hearing all this, Avnish's interest in Siri Fort grew even more. He wanted to stay there for a night to see if these things actually happen, or if it's just a story, like every old monument in Delhi has some ghostly tale associated with it. As darkness fell, his entire team left, but he stayed behind with his camera, torch and notepad. Avnish went inside, and at night, the ruins of the city of Siri Fort looked even more beautiful than during the day. He couldn't believe that such beautiful walls had once held the heads of 8,000 Mongol soldiers. After crossing the mosque, he headed towards the corner of the first built wall. The path was filled with bushes, and a chilling silence surrounded him. He began to see the ruins of that wall, and it felt like he could hear someone calling for help. He thought it might just be an echo from somewhere far away, so he didn't pay much attention to it. But as soon as he turned on his camera, the flash illuminated the walls ahead, and suddenly he saw a severed head embedded in the wall. Avnish panicked. He removed the camera and looked towards the wall. But there was no one there. When he tried to look back into the camera, it suddenly turned off. Onish found this very strange, because when he had arrived, his camera battery was full. Just as he was trying to turn his camera back on, he started hearing the sounds of horses neighing and the pounding of hooves from a short distance. Avnish had heard in a story that at night, Sri Fort comes alive, the walls there start creating an illusion of that time, and those dead Mongols imprison people like themselves in the dilapidated walls of Sri Fort. So when he heard that voice, Avnish thought that it would be better to leave Sri Fort. So Avnish started leaving there, but he couldn't find a way out. No matter which direction he went, he kept circling back to the same wall. His phone had also turned off. Onish started screaming there. But even after shouting, no one could hear him. He became extremely anxious. The sounds just wouldn't stop. Somehow he put all his strength into it and started running away from that wall in the opposite direction without stopping. And as he was running, the sound of those horses started getting louder and louder, and started coming closer to him. While running, he came in front of that wall again. Now show him that. A severed head is trying to come out of that wall. From its war helmet and face, it was clear that it was the head of a Mongol soldier. Avnish saw that its mouth was slowly opening, as if the severed head was trying to say something. Avnish closed his eyes in fear. He told himself that this was all a part of his imagination. But when he opened his eyes, his mouth was asleep. Because now in front of him, there were not just one, but several severed heads emerging from the walls, staring at him and screaming in pain. Onish's heart was racing rapidly. He was trying to scream like a madman, but his voice had also stopped coming out. It felt like all those heads were crying out in pain pulling him towards them. Onish couldn't hold himself together. His hands were trembling, and he suddenly felt himself being pulled towards the wall. It felt as if many hands were reaching out from those walls, grabbing him and pulling him towards them. And they are pulling. He started rubbing his head against the walls as if he was becoming a part of the buried heads. He was in a lot of pain, but he just couldn't stop himself. Suddenly, he felt sharp pain in his neck. He felt as if someone was separating his head from his body. All around him, they were cut off, heads turning to stare at him, and screamed louder. Avnish also kept screaming in pain, but there was no one there to hear his voice. Next morning, when one of the guards of Shri Fort was taking rounds there, he found Avnish rubbing his head against the same wall. The guard stopped Avnish, but he wanted to bury himself inside that wall, like a madman. Somehow the guard pulled Avnish away from that wall. As soon as Avnish moved away from the wall, he collapsed and fainted immediately. After a while, Avnish's eyes opened in the hospital. He told everyone about the incident that happened to him. Everyone was shocked to hear about Avnish's experience. Since that day, Avnish never looked back at Siri Fort again. Those ruins of Siri Fort are still there. Life goes on day and night in the surrounding areas, but those Mongol soldiers within the walls of Siri Fort, even today, you can find them waiting to be buried in those walls just like themselves.